Therapist perception.
Bachelorette. Hello and welcome back to Reactivity TV. I'm Amy Alvaro and I'm a licensed therapist.
I am Chris. I am not a licensed therapist, but it's the finale and somebody has to talk about it and I'm here. So I'm going to talk about it.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to talking about it with you. There was so much to unpack in this finale episode. So we're going to get to all of that. But before we do, please be sure to hit that like button at the bottom of this video. And please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I know I say it every week, but it is such a small thing that actually goes a really, really long way. So thank you in advance for doing that.
Yeah, and please also make sure to hit that bell icon so that you're alerted anytime we post new content to the channel. All right, so let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. We're a week late. We apologize profusely. For full disclosure, we recorded the episode originally, and we don't have a active producer, and we lost one microphone right at the beginning. The other microphone went out about 30 minutes in, and we did our best to try and salvage the original recording, but it was just it was trash, and we just didn't feel good even attempting to release it. So here we are, refilming a week later. We've had a week longer to think about what has happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
to let it all marinate.
Yeah. So I want to start with the other elephant in the room. So for those of you who may not be aware, there was a hit piece that came out on Gerry. It's 2023. We see these hit pieces constantly. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this because, quite frankly, I don't think it's worth the paper that it's written on. But it is going to be memorialized as part of this show, and it did come out on the same day as the finale. So let's just do a quick rundown of it, and then I never really want to see or talk about it ever again.
Well, you're calling it a hit piece.
Sure. I mean, that's what it was, right? At the end of the day, it was trying to dig up dirt on dubious sourcing on Gerry and releasing it to make him look worse, like a worse human being on the day that he's supposed to be doing the finale. That is kind of definitionally what a hit piece is. So if you didn't read it, I'll save you from the time and effort and the brain cells that will be lost. The reporter basically sourced an ex of Gerry's. This is an ex after his wife had passed that he had been dating. And this individual basically said that Gerry had once said that she basically looked fat after gaining 10 pounds. They had suggested that he wasn't a restaurateur. He only owned one restaurant 20 years ago. And that he was, pretending like he was this, restaurateur, individual. The first couple things I'll say about that is I've been doing a podcast on this guy for 10 weeks. And at no point in time did I ever realize he ever owned a restaurant, because he doesn't talk about it and doesn't care. And in fact, when he goes into other podcasts and does other interviews, he almost always talks about the other things he's done. He actually has had a ton of different jobs. So that felt a little bit weak. We have no context for the statement. There's one statement that he supposedly made about an individual being fat. He's lived 72 years. I'm sure he said some things that were a little off color. But if that's the worst that they can come up with, I don't think that there's there's not a lot of receipts there to suggest that he's somehow this super bad person. Mm-hmm. And then the last thing is that the fact that he had dated after Tony had died, and he didn't just jump from despair into being the Golden Bachelor. And again, did anyone honestly think that in the 6 years he literally just went from 0 to Golden Bachelor? Like, obviously not. So yeah, I think that at the end of the day, he's lived over 7 decades on this planet. And if this is the best dirt that they can come up with on Gerry, then he actually might be the best human being alive. Find me any other 70-year-old who would have as clean a hit piece as Gerry. And that's really, my kind of whole take on it. So in summation, the journalist is a hack. The Hollywood Reporter is a rag. We learn no interesting or unique information about it. And there's a reason why the, faith in journalism and the news is at its all-time low. And this is another great example of why, and it's well-deserved, in my opinion. So coming out swinging, your quick thoughts.
Definitely coming in hot over here.
But where am I wrong?
So I did not read the article. I just heard about it from you and from other Bachelor recap podcasts that I listened to. I do want to know another kind of piece of information that seems to be talked about that was in the article was something around Gerry asking this ex to pay for her dinner
Oh,
up
that's right.
front
Yeah.
and then him put it on his credit card. And also something about her contributing toward the household expenses. And I want to add that in here because what other chatter has been around this article has been speculation about why Gerry chose Theresa, in inferring that Gerry has no money or Gerry is cheap. And therefore, the only reason that Gerry showed an interest in Theresa is once he learned what her job was, and he's just marrying Theresa for her money. I mean, so I've heard a lot of inferences made about Gerry as a result of this
So
article.
Gary's a gold digger is what people are suggesting.
So not the Golden Bachelor, but the Gold Digger Bachelor.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I don't follow the same YouTube channels and podcasts that you do, so I have not actually heard this theory. Okay. I think if you look at Gerry in totality across everything we've learned about him, I would have a hard time believing that that would be the case. As a man and as just my observations of him, doesn't seem to align for me. But definitely, if you're a tinfoil hat individual, I could see how you could get there.
You're really wow. Okay, that's what kind of episode this is going to be, folks. Buckle up, I guess. But going back to the article itself, I just want to say that like this article definitely had, in a lot of ways, its intended purpose, which was to create a very different view of Gerry in the general public. And for that, that's kind of the piece that I want to speak to. One is that, and I'm sorry if this offends you, but if you believed every single word that ABC was telling you about this man to be fact, then you are very naive. And
they are putting on a TV show, and they are ultimately creating a character. Exactly.
And so I think that we want to, right? Like, and I think I'm saying that you're naive. I mean, maybe that it speaks to just a hopefulness that like we want to believe in someone being so wholesome, and we want to have this hopefulness around aging and elders being sources of wisdom. And so ABC helped us as an audience put Gerry on this pedestal, and then we realize like, he's just a mere mortal like the rest of us, and we are shattered and disappointed. And I think that is what is really happening, is that we're seeing that Gerry is not perfect. We're seeing that he is flawed, like you and me and you as well. And that happens a lot in life, especially as we grow and develop. We experience this a lot, particularly as we grow from children to adults as it relates to our parents. And like one experience that a lot of individuals have who may have positive and healthy relationships with at least one parent or caregiver is that they grow up with their parent on a bit of a pedestal. And a lot of that is related to our own unconscious and yet psychological need to believe that our parents are holding us with as much safety and care as possible, and that they've got their shit together. To believe anything else would be incredibly scary for a child to imagine. And so we do, just out of our own self-preservation, create this pedestal to put our parents on. And then as we grow up and become adults and we become disillusioned, we see that, hey, this is our parents doing their first time at life right along with us, and they don't know what they're doing either, and they've probably made mistakes. They've probably imprinted on us a lot of our own issues and difficulties, and so our parents fall from this pedestal, and that's what often creates a lot of tension and conflict between adult children and their parents. And we're seeing that kind of play out in a really similar way as it relates to Gerry, the grandfather of America. But one other thing that I wanted to comment on is the experience of Gerry's ex and her contributions to this article. And, one thing that I want to empathize with her in how difficult we've been talking all season long about, like, oh gosh, like whoever Gerry picks has to watch this back. And what's it going to feel like for them to hear Gerry say a lot of these things to other people. Well, this woman, this ex,
Is living that right now.
living that right now. And we're hearing Gerry say, I, haven't had these feelings since my wife died, meaning I didn't have these feelings with this ex person. And that's really got to feel really, really difficult.
It's got to sting.
It's got to sting. And, the reality is that in relationships and dating, what can mean a lot to me, or what I can think in terms of a relationship's amount of importance, might be really different than you. And so it is possible and probable, this happens again all the time in dating, that she could have had one idea about what their relationship was, or how important it was, or how invested she was or he was, and he could have had a really different understanding of what that was. And so I just want to, just because we have this piece of information doesn't automatically cancel out everything that Gerry has told us. And so I guess what I'm saying is, let's try to, I try to operate in the assumption of giving people the benefit of the doubt, having as much empathy for people that I possibly can, and understanding that everyone is doing the best that they can, navigating, again, life, which is so complicated, for the very first time. And so I'm just asking for grace to be extended to all parties here, because there's no reason for us to necessarily pick sides. There's never a right or wrong in it when it comes to
two different perceptions.
Exactly.
Yeah. So one main takeaway from everything you just said is that ultimately the ex is not an objective party.
Of course not. No.
And so doing a bunch of research and journalism using one person who is clearly not objective is maybe a bit hacky on the part of the journalist. And maybe only a rag would print such a article by such a hacky journalist. Is that I think that's what you said.
I'm not sure about that. But I guess on that note, let's actually move on. Let's move into the episode.
No. We got one other thing to talk about.
Do we?
Everybody, guess what? This is not our finale episode for Golden Bachelor.
That's true.
We've gotten a big announcement. You are going to have to see us one more time on or around January 4th, because Gerry and Theresa, spoiler, Theresa got picked. Gerry and Theresa are getting married on camera. I'm going to warn you all right now, we might be late on that episode too, because we are going to be on a sailboat in the middle of St. Martin. So I'm going to figure that one out for you, but we are going to record an episode, one more on Golden Bachelor. Yeah. You excited for this one? Watching people get married is awful. Awful. And you know what? The cake and the dancing afterwards is usually not worth it.
I mean, I enjoy weddings.
I feel like we're getting a couple dislikes for that one alone.
Televised weddings, I don't know that I'm such a fan of.
Is this like the royal wedding? Is this like the US's version of like the royal wedding?
I'm not sure about that, but maybe for Bachelor Nation, that kind of royalty.
Have we ever had one get?
Oh yeah.
They got televised?
Yeah.
Oh really? Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah.
So yes, we'll be back definitely with our reactions to the Golden Wedding.
Oh, is that what we're calling it?
I guess it just came
rolls off the tongue. The Golden Wedding.
I just want to take a quick pause to tell you that Revive is hiring. In our Miami and Pittsburgh offices, we have full and part-time W-2 and 1099 clinician positions available, and this includes both postgraduate and associate level licenses, in addition to fully licensed clinicians. In our Connecticut offices, we have full-time, fully licensed W-2 clinician positions available, including clinical supervisor opportunities. If you are interested in working for a company that values community, work-life balance, and your personal and professional growth, then we want to meet you. Find a link to our website in our bio. All
right, so let's get into the episode, shall we? Nice and quick.
Yes.
Early entry.
Jumping
right in. All right. So this is the episode where the ladies meet Gerry's family, and they do their little sit downs and stuff like that. They then go and have in like a last date in the evening, and then we make it down to the altar, presumably, and it's just going to go like that, nice and smooth, no hiccups whatsoever. We start with Theresa, then we move on to Leslie. They do the entire thing in one shot. They don't flip back and forth. So let's just start right off with Theresa. So Theresa shows up at Gerry's house, sits down, gets to meet the family. Gerry has two daughters, Jenny, the tall one, and Angie, the short one, I think it is. correct me if I'm wrong. And
Jenny blonde, Andrew brunette.
I don't know the hair colors, but sure, I'll trust you.
Also the granddaughters, Peyton and Charlie.
That was Chloe. Okay, Charlie. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, realistically, the granddaughters played no material factor in the episode. They were there for moral support. I didn't necessarily, we didn't get a lot of screen time with them, and the little we did wasn't, in my view, particularly meaningful. But the daughters, particularly Jenny, right? I thought asked really good questions of both women. And I thought she was sort of the tougher of the two, and sort of the more interesting one to try and read and get a sense of things. But Theresa, I thought, overwhelmingly did a fantastic job on this. It felt easy, and I use this analogy a lot whenever I'm like advising anybody in the business world or on whenever they're going on job interviews. I say, it should not feel like a back and forth of question answer question answer. It should feel like a conversation. That, if you go in and you're interviewing for a job, if you did a back and forth of question and answer, then you failed the interview, right? It should just feel like a flow, natural conversation where everything just naturally, just topics come in and out easily. And that's what it felt like with Theresa. Spoiler, it did not feel like that with Leslie at all. And so then the daughters pull Theresa aside, and they go through all the standard, questions that you'd expect to ask. Why do you like Gerry? How do you see it working out? All of these types of things. And really, her answers were really solid and good. They were genuine, and you could tell that the daughters like genuinely liked her. I thought Jenny was a little more guarded than Angie in a lot of ways, and a little more, I would say, protective is the wrong word. Suspicious isn't the right word, but like
cautious.
Cautious. Yeah, cautious is a great word. She was a little bit more cautious into this entire experiment for her father, but ultimately, I do think she really, really warmed to Theresa.
So I think Theresa killed it. My notes here were around how natural and organic the conversation seemed, to your point, around it not necessarily feeling like a game of like ping pong. Okay. Oh, well,
nice callback.
But I think what was really meaningful for Gerry's daughters to hear was about Theresa's experience being married to Billy and going through her process of grief and loss. And that seemed, I mean, we saw Angie get very emotional. She said that learning about Theresa's past bonds Gerry and Theresa together because they have that shared understanding, and also bonds Theresa to them too, because she also knows what it is to be a parent of adult kids who are grieving the loss of a really prominent figure in their life. And we've talked about it the entire season, that grief is so complicated, and it's also so individual and so unique for each and every person. And here we have these two individuals, Gerry and Theresa, who have been in decades long relationships with their spouses, and who have both died suddenly, and who have both been now out of serious relationships for 6+ years. So that is so unique in a lot of ways, that they are able to actually have that shared understanding. And again, that Theresa can really empathize with what it's also like for Gerry's daughters to have Theresa kind of step into this family, because she's probably thinking about her own kids and what it will be like for Gerry to step in to like alongside where Billy used to be. And so I think that was probably like a check in the pros column or plus column for Theresa on behalf of the daughters.
And so how much effect do you think her accidentally getting drunk on vodka beforehand played into her ability to be nice and loose and down to earth with everybody?
Hey, I mean, maybe that helped. But
Gerry slipped her vodka without her knowing.
That was really funny and weird. But yeah, I mean, listen, they again have such a very unique and shared experience and understanding of one another. And I think the daughters probably felt that. And I think they are still grieving their mom in their own way. And so to have somebody come in and understand the still remaining importance of their mom and not feel threatened by that is also probably, again, another huge check in that column.
Yeah, I mean, as far as meeting the parents go, in this case, meeting the children, I thought it was pretty much an A. I don't think she could have really done better,
Mhm.
given the situation. And
And that's a big deal because
yeah,
we know that Gerry is going to take into consideration what his family says. That's going to be a huge consideration. Oh, but that also reminds me that one thing that we learn at the top of this episode is that despite what some like speculation has been, and I know some of you have been wondering about it in our comments of our previous recaps, is that Gerry hasn't actually spoken to his daughters throughout this entire time. So this is really the first time that his daughters are hearing from him about his experience and have any context about these women.
all right, so let's roll into Theresa's last chance date. Now, I have a couple of positives and a couple of negatives here. One is that, again, it went very, very well. It had the moment in the episode where, for me, I thought for certain, like, oh, Gerry is picking Theresa.
Mhm.
But also, there were moments in here where it felt, I don't know, maybe a smidge, a touch, a sprinkle of emotional blackmailing a little bit in there. She really laid out the whole "if you don't pick me, I'm going to die" sort of feeling. I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea. Like there were a lot of like I don't know, maybe hyperbolic statements that I'd like to get your opinion on. But before we get there, I will say one thing. So um, one thing that I really value is the ability to talk about things with a partner without concerned that they are going to try and read into things that aren't there. And so for context, for as the example here, Gerry and Theresa talked about how important it was and how much they enjoyed talking about their ex-spouses or their
Mhm.
deceased spouses with each other. Now, I am sure that, and correct me if I'm wrong, you follow more of the commentary in the community. I am sure there were a lot of people out there that were horrified by that. And thought, like, you don't talk about an ex with your current partner. And the answer is, it depends on the context of speaking with them. I have no fear whatsoever. If I'm telling a story about something in the past and it involves an ex girlfriend of mine, I have no concerns. If it's relevant to the story or in some way, shape, or form, the cameo of the ex is relevant to the story to get the point across. Like I have no fear that you're going to sit there and be like, I can't believe you talked about your ex. Because there's a safety in that. There's a certain level of maturity. An ex is an ex for a reason, and you can't just ignore that they existed. And sometimes, if you're talking about your past, who you are, how you came to be, how you are, you can't do that without talking about the people you've dated, especially in the context of a relationship. And I feel like that there's oftentimes this feeling, stigma, whatever you want to call it, where you're just not allowed to talk about your exes. And I actually think that's extraordinarily unhealthy. I think it's very, very unhealthy if you're in a relationship where one or both partners are unwilling to hear anything about an ex ever. And so I took this as a moment saying, oh, this is like next level maturity in
Mhm.
terms of understanding and wanting to communicate. And I thought the piece that was so important was when I think it was Gerry said it that I learn about you and how you are going to be in a relationship by learning about your prior relationship with Billy. And that to me was like the moment where I'm like, I think Theresa's got this in the bag.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
Your thoughts on all of this?
I generally agree with you in that we should be able to tolerate hearing about previous serious relationships, of course, depending on the context, right?
Sure.
And not only does it show a sign of maturity, but it also shows a sign of security with oneself and within the relationship. But again, context matters. So that's all.
Relevance to the story being told
Yeah.
matters tremendously. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. And so yeah, I generally agree with that. I think particularly in this circumstance when you're talking about two individuals that were married again for decades and these were incredibly important relationships. How could you not, right? Like how could you not um have them be a part of your current journey. They're a huge part of what's formed your identity. And that's a lot of what Gerry and Theresa were talking about. And they shared how they enjoy hearing about one another's spouses because they've helped each other to understand who they each are and knowing that these previous relationships have also shaped them into who they are today. So as they basically summarized what you just said too, in that like no, it's cool. Like I get to know you through knowing your relationship. And I thought that was beautiful. And again, going back to what I said before in relation to Gary's daughters and their experience of Theresa, here's another example of that, of like they have this shared understanding and where it just feels so safe and comfortable and organic to be able to just freely talk about these things without any like you know, don't have to worry, or like there's room in my heart for you too. Like there's just an understanding. You don't have to go through those overtures. And that must feel like a relief in some ways for both of them to not have to explain
Yeah, and
or reassure.
yeah, and what I thought about when hearing that conversation between the two of them is, could you envision Leslie and Gerry having a similar conversation? Could you envision when Gerry is talking about Tony, which will probably come up because they were together for 50 some odd years, married for 43, I think it was, 42, whatever it was. There's no way that Tony's not going to come up in a conversation every single day. And could you actually envision, Leslie being able to emotionally handle that? And I don't think she could. I think it would wear on her tremendously.
I don't know. I mean, I can't really speak on that, but what we do know, and this is something that she talked about in the previous episode and she brought up again, is that it's really hard for her to relate to that. And I think that is something that can wear on an individual, is just like not really being able to completely understand. And that can get hard and can lead to insecurity or just a feeling of disconnection.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you could be with the most fun person in the world and you could do all kinds of fun things and really enjoy it. But eventually things won't be fun. And eventually somebody just needs to be held and somebody just talk something out and somebody needs to just work through problems. And, just because you were fun,
right.
That dissipates pretty quickly.
I can't imagine, and I guess we'll figure this out on January 4th, but I can't imagine a world where during this wedding that Gerry and Theresa have, that their spouses will not be a huge part of it. Like there's no
They gotta at least be on the table, the memory table, right?
Of course, but I can't, I can't fathom them not being part of their vows or part of something.
Sure.
And again, that it's not even like a second thought probably for both of them.
Yeah. All right. So you didn't want to touch the emotional blackmailing piece at all, huh?
Listen, I don't see it as emotional blackmail. I see it as Theresa just being very direct and saying, I'm all in. It would be difficult for me if you didn't pick me, but I also don't want you to pick me if you're not 100% in, or she said 1,000% in. If you're not also 1,000% in too. And so I respect the crap out of that, especially within a franchise where it feels like they're just like directing you toward an engagement. And you have spoiler alert to Bachelor in Paradise finale, which we'll be covering. Which
I still have not watched. I was on a plane when it came out. So
you have people like, maybe might as well try to give it a go. Around this, or like that's like the assumption of how that goes, and that's not what Theresa wants. She wants someone that is 1,000% sure that she is the pick, and she deserves that. We all do, and so I don't begrudge her at all for laying that out there. I respect that.
Yeah, I mean, we've gone a little long on Theresa, so we got to move on. But what I would say is, her arc in this story has been started really, really, really strong, where we all thought she was, Faith and her were 1 and 2. And then she had a real long lull. She got some bad edits, this whole stuff with Kathy, and then really just coming on strong. So it's in NFL terms, you got to play your best football after Thanksgiving. And I got to say, Theresa did that. The football reference.
I got it.
All right.
Okay.
Shall we get into Leslie?
Sure.
All right. Oh boy, if we went that long on Theresa, I don't know how long this Leslie segment's going to be. So, in
all fairness, we have had an extra week to think about this.
We have, yes.
So we really have a lot to say.
We got a lot to say. Yeah. The audience is going to be like, say less.
You told us you wanted our reactions. Here they are.
People were really upset that we were late. We got a lot of comments, a lot of DMs, a lot of emails.
We did this already.
We did. Yeah. So Leslie shows up at the house. Let's just call it what it is. It was a bit of an awkward mess. She, I don't think presented her case as strongly as she could have. I did like her dress though. Dress was very pretty, nice little soft color. Big fan. But yeah, to me, it felt like she kind of overshared, and didn't answer questions well. I feel
Mhm.
like whereas Theresa, all of her questions felt genuine and they were good, solid answers that left you feeling like this could work.
Mhm.
Everything with Leslie felt, a little guarded or a little hedged in some
Mm,
ways. Um,
interesting.
your thoughts?
So I do agree that Leslie's experience with the family did not appear to go as well, which I think heavily weighed
Mhm.
in Gary's decision making. We do know though that Gary's granddaughters really liked Leslie, which doesn't surprise me. I bet she's like a
Fun energy. Yeah.
yeah, really fun. And that's what they talked about. And that's what Gary's talked about, how infectious her energy is. Angie and Jenny talked about how fun it was and refreshing it was to see them joking around with one another. And that seems to be a big part of their dynamic. But where I was really getting concerned was when Leslie was talking with Gary's daughters. And this might feel a little strange for me to say, but I almost felt like Leslie was a little like too honest in what
Mm.
she was sharing. You just said that she overshared, and I'm kind of in the same vein as that, where I felt like she was making such a solid attempt to be vulnerable and to be honest and share about her insecurity related to never having had as long of a relationship as Gary has. This concept of till death do us part, she brought that up, that they had talked about in their overnight date, and that had become very insecure. But a point of insecurity for her. But I think if I, as I was watching this and putting myself in the position of Gary's daughters, I was just watching the way that Leslie was engaging around this topic, and it, like, for me, screamed a lack of actual readiness
Mm.
to engage in a to engage in a relationship that could be one of those till death do us part relationships, mostly due to how raw and undone she became as she talked about it. And as someone coming in who is going to be um, a mother figure to these women, granted they're all adults, it probably felt, as I said at the beginning, around like wanting, like holding our parents up on this pedestal, we still want to believe and have faith that the adults in our life have got it, have got their shit together, have got it together. And so I could imagine feeling a little cautious and hesitant thinking about Gary and his, again, decades long relationship with their mother, and then seeing this woman who just seems so kind of, I was going to use the word fragile, that feels unfair, of Leslie, but just as it related to her, the way she engaged on this.
Mhm.
So I wish that she could have held back a little bit in terms of the way that she was expressing her concern around this.
Be honest, but put your best foot forward and have a little discretion, more or less.
Mhm. A little more containment. I think
Containment, sure.
I
Yeah.
think the lack of containment for me was like almost a little anxiety
Mhm.
provoking. And so it seemed like her daughter, I'm sorry, Gary's daughters picked up on that. We also, like, we even saw their body
Mm.
language as
Yeah.
they like disengaged from her. And that for me was like, okay, it's not it. And then they moved to the bench outside and talk. And we didn't see this, but I have to imagine we that Gary and his daughters came back together at some point and had a "what did you think"
A
kind of
debrief.
conversation,
Yeah. Yeah.
because happens all the time.
Sure.
And so that must have been what was present for Gary on the bench as Leslie and Gary were debriefing.
Yeah. I mean, so there was a lot there. Now, this next kind of segment of the episode was the hardest to watch, maybe some of the hardest stuff to watch in the entire
Mhm.
season. But there were some real interesting moments in there.
Mhm.
To be clear, the bench sealed it for me. I knew immediately when he sat down. Leslie knew it. He knew it. Everybody knew it. Any man watching this knew it. Men can oftentimes be cowards when they are trying to break up with a woman. And in this case, he's trying to break up with her on national television. But when he's staring at her in those long pauses, it was so clear. It was
Mhm.
a moment where I looked at, I've been there. Every man who's ever, been young and dating has been there, where he's staring there and he knows, she knows, he doesn't have the mental strength at that moment to do what he needs to do. And so he kind of leaves it hanging. Um, and
And she really picks up on it.
And she picks up on it. That's one thing that you've noted that Gerry talks about a lot, is how she is always really in tune with what's going on with them. And it was so clear that she knew it was over at that point. But she still had hope
that something was off.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. But she even said she didn't feel confident anymore. Right. So she knew. So then we roll into the evening last chance date. And this was hard to watch. It was really, really hard to watch. The main takeaway for me was, she says, "I love you." He says, "That's basically, that's nice. Pat on the head. Thank you."
I give her a lot of credit because she brings up, hey, when we were saying goodbye earlier, like something seemed off. What's going on? And he kind of hedged a little bit and said, this has just been really hard. And then she goes into communicating about how she can't imagine being without him now. And then his response is, "That's important." She tells him she loves him, and he says, "That's such a special sentiment. I can feel it."
Can I just make one comment here? Gerry, these were the proper responses every other time somebody said that they loved you this show.
Yes.
Now is not the right time.
No, you can't unring the bell.
Oh, that's what it was. It was trying to put milk back in the carton, unring the bell, all the other metaphors. It was hard, and you could just see Leslie it looked like one punch after the other, and she was just taking it, and it was just so hard to watch because she was trying so hard, and
his parting words to her at that point are, "Be happy."
Yeah. Oh God.
And then they're kind of embracing, and he's sobbing, and she's saying, "Is there something that you want to tell me?" And he's saying, "No, it's just that I have a hard decision to make, and it's harder than I ever imagined." And so he leaves, and then he's sitting and just sobbing as well.
And so now this is the scene that we've all been waiting for. It's been trailered every single week in every episode. We knew it was coming. He and Jesse, who, by the way, Jesse, just doing a fantastic job across the board. Yeah, he's really, really done a great job. And he had a nice kind of moment with Jesse for a second there. But even Jesse, poor Jesse, he's like, "I don't know what I'm gonna say." I mean, he's like a deer in headlights. Gets through it, whatever. But I felt for Jesse here too, because he's supposed to be the calm, like the force. He's supposed to be the grounding rock. He's like a rock. You lean on him. And I give him credit. That had to have been a hard one. But this is what I talk about all the time. Guys can be cowards. And again, second shot, Gerry's a coward again. We all know, everybody knew. I give him a lot of credit that he sat outside and worked himself up and mustered up, some courage to go and do what he needed to do. But he never should have gotten that far. I think this is a moment where Gerry is finally understanding what all these overpromises are resulting in. And it's all suddenly coming back and hitting them all at once. And it's deserved in a lot of ways, right? We know that he's a genuine guy. We know that he means well. We know that he truly does like live in his feelings. And that's all. Those are wonderful qualities. But you did a lot of overpromising and a lot of under-delivering, right? And this one, clearly you can just see it. It's hitting them all at once. So he sits outside, works himself up, and finally says, I have to do this. And I want to say, you had mentioned early, I don't know if it was this one or Paradise, but you had mentioned early in one of our first recaps that oftentimes, the leads will, not make them walk down to the altar, or they might send the set number 2 home in the number 3 spot or something like that to spare them some of the pain. And so Gerry does know that he wants to do that. And I give him a lot of credit that he does make that decision and finally roll with it after a while. So he goes back to her room, knocks on the door. She opens up, and, we all know what's going to happen. She asks him what's up. He asks if he can
Mhm.
come in. Very gentlemanly thing to do. Big fan. Men do that. And
Mhm.
she lets him in.
Yeah.
Lets her know that he is going to go with Theresa,
Mhm.
and Leslie um I has an emotional reaction to
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
I don't know what we call that for a clinical term, but she's upset. And she makes a lot of accusations, deservedly so,
Mhm.
about how she felt lied to and
Mhm.
manipulated and stuff like
Mhm.
that. So before we get into all the other context, walk me through like what in your mind is going through Gerry as he's outside to lead back in.
Oh gosh. I mean, it's probably so much. It's probably guilt. It's probably grief and sadness. Um, like just regret, all of it. And I think it's got to be really hard, and just like anxiety about knowing he's walking in there to break her heart. This woman
Mhm.
who just told him that she loves him and can't imagine living without him. This woman that he's made serious promises to just
Mhm.
12 hours before. And so I've got to imagine that he's just the pit of anxiety and guilt, and just again, and also sadness of also having to end something with a woman that he cares about too. So probably a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I know how guilty I feel when I tell you I'm going to change a light bulb and I don't on time. I can't imagine being in that situation. But though that was a big overpromise, under deliver. So,
So he, as you said, he tells her, I've made my decision and I'm going with Theresa. And her immediate reaction is, and I quote, everything you told me the other night was a lie, a complete and utter lie. And he reasons that no, because at that time it was the truth. Don't love that.
don't love that.
And then she's doing what so many people do in relationships, wondering like, where did it go wrong? Kind of questioning herself. But then Gerry responds, "You're wonderful, but only one of you is right." And there were so many missteps and there are more to come here. One of the things that we hear Leslie say is, "This is typical. This is my life, and this is the way that it goes." And that piece I really want to speak on, because that is in large part Leslie's narrative. That is her experience of relationships. We know that she's been married twice before, both for around 7 years each. It's been framed as though she has not been the one to initiate the endings of those relationships in some way, shape, or form. We also know that infidelity has been prominent in her relationships. And so, of course, this is just going to validate that belief that she's not chosen or worthy or lovable. And so I was really feeling for her in that moment. Um, he responds to her, "No, don't think that." And I mean, I cheered when she said, "I can think whatever the fuck I want."
And this was the applause line. The
Yeah.
crowd went wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I just say that this is my favorite moment for Leslie,
Mhm.
because she in a lot of ways is kind of the doormat, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Which is sort of a from a book you read many years ago,
Mhm.
and the whole like don't be a doormat type thing. And that sort of is her relationship
Yeah.
personality, where and this was a moment where it was powerful, it was
Yeah.
raw, it was her standing up for herself, it was her not being a doormat,
Mhm.
and really calling Gerry out,
Right. Standing in her
and
own power.
yeah, and I loved it for her. I mean, it felt terrible for her. It really was
Mhm.
like it was hard to watch, but it was a powerful moment, and
Mhm.
I think a lot of people saw that and agreed with
Yeah.
that, and yeah.
Right. And like, and to her point, and what I had just said, like it's in this exact moment when you are in the thick of this emotion, this unexpected breakup. um what other way could you possibly um consider this as just, here's yet another example, here's yet another thing, here's yet another notch on this board of failed
Mhm.
relationships or
Yeah.
times I'm not chosen. And so, like, respectfully, Gerry, like that's not your place, or and definitely not the time, but certainly not your place to comment.
Yeah.
And then the thing that for me was really heartbreaking and devastating was, she said, "I'm heartbroken again, and I have to do it in front of the whole world
Mhm.
and everyone." Oh gosh, I'm getting like emotional reading this. "And everyone will need to see how broken I am." And gosh, that's sad.
Yeah, I agree. It was. I've said it many times. It was a hard scene to watch. Maybe the hardest scene uh, of the entire season,
Mhm,
both Paradise and
mhm,
Golden. But I do think in a lot of ways it was a very powerful
mhm,
scene, and I'm happy that they captured it the way that they did.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I feel very, very, sad for her.
Mhm,
Um, but at the same time, like I do feel like this was a great growth moment, and
mhm.
we saw on the couch later when she's doing her interview with Jesse. There does feel like some confidence came from this entire experience, and she does feel like a slightly different person after going through
Mhm,
all this and
mhm.
having months to sort of
Yeah,
process and stuff like that.
right.
Um,
Well, and one thing that I just also want to comment on is, well, certainly, Leslie, if you happen to be watching this, you are not broken, although I understand how you could feel that way. But I also just want to speak to the societal pressure that we experience as women, in that it's important for us to, in order for us to be whole, that we need to be in a relationship. Whereas for men, a lot of your success is measured as it relates to your career or your income. For women, it's often around like being in a relationship or getting married, especially for women that are in their 20s, 30s, etc. And so we can feel as though we are broken or something's wrong with us if we haven't necessarily been successful in sustaining that milestone of a relationship. And I'm wondering if that might be what contributes to Leslie feeling as though she is broken, or Leslie feeling as though something is wrong with her, because she has had difficulty in relationships in the past.
hmm,
So going back to them being in the room, the other thing that I wanted to touch on was not only the words Gerry was using in his efforts, I'll say, to try to console her, was also that he was making efforts to embrace her, and that was also very uncomfortable to watch. And again, it's one of those situations where I felt like Gerry had the best of intentions, but it put Leslie in a really uncomfortable and situation, in that this woman is so vulnerable and she probably doesn't really want to be near you right now, but also wants to be comforted. And I felt like that put her in such an awkward situation. And it felt like, and this is something that we have talked about in recaps early on. One of my first criticisms of Gerry is that like when someone shares a difficult situation or difficult memory, he'll share one in kind. And I was saying that that's like kind of invalidating, and often is about his ability to be comfortable. And that's what I was seeing here. Like these words he was saying, these efforts he was making physically and verbally, while they were, I think, intended for Leslie, they were also for him to feel more comfortable, or for him to feel as though he was supporting her. And if he had stepped back and thought about what does Leslie actually want and need in this moment, he probably would have engaged differently. And if he had done that actually throughout his whole journey, and employed empathy about these women and this experience, and having foresight into, hey, there are still, 4 or 5 women left. What's it going to be like for me to say this? And then 1 out of 5 odds that this is going to be the one I'm going to pick. Like he didn't have the empathy or the foresight in so much of his journey. And we saw that yet again here, that he operated in this journey with himself in mind.
mhm.
And he says that to Leslie when they sit on the couch.
Says it many times.
It
This is
was
my
my
journey.
journey,
Yeah,
and I had to see it through to the end.
yeah.
And no, it wasn't, Gerry. That's the fantasy that um ABC and the Bachelor franchise impart onto you as the lead. But that is not the reality.
And he's made that comment many times. We commented on it several
Yeah.
times. That has been a through line
Yeah.
through many of the episodes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So let's go to that live portion. Leslie on the couch. I know you've already kind of alluded to that as well, but let's talk about their exchange and their face to face reconnection.
Yeah, I mean, for starters, it it's been months, right? It's been 4 or 5 months, something like that, since they actually haven't seen each other. All the women were there. We got a whole bunch of cameos from a bunch of people. Everybody looked great. You know, some people looked like they had some work done. Some people looked like they got glammed up or whatever you call. What do you call it? Glow ups. Yep. Everybody had amazing dresses on. It was. You had some Paradise people on there. Joey, next Bachelor was there. So everybody was there. It was a party. Before we get into the actual stuff on the couch, I just do want to address the fact that the women from the show, their reactions and their responses to the things that were happening and the scenes that were being shown was priceless. That
was my favorite part of the episode.
Oh my God, they looked angry.
Yeah.
Angry. And not because they weren't there, angry at the way things turned out.
Yeah.
And the way
I think ultimately angry on behalf of their friends.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that speaks a lot to what we said all the time, the genuine friendships that I think that all of these women made, just the maturity level of them all. Yeah, it was a wonderful. It was wonderful to see how they all supported one another. But it also, I think, really spoke to how much they disagreed with the way things had been handled by Gerry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I would love to take a straw poll of them and find out how many of them, wish they were in the final two versus not after watching that. Be interesting.
Faith appeared very sad.
Very emotional.
She cried most of the episode, or most of what we saw.
Yeah.
And we also saw Ellen look quite upset and just annoyed and angry, as you said.
Yeah, Ellen struck me more as like annoyed that it wasn't her. Faith seemed sad that it wasn't her. No,
I don't think so. I think Ellen. I really my read on it was that Ellen felt led on. And she was like reacting to Gerry, kind of like leading these women on too.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. And so you think Faith was sad because she wanted to be her, or
probably hearing the way that Gerry was, again, talking to these women, the same thing that I talked about in regard to the Hollywood Reporter report, like hearing Gerry say these things to these women that he also said to her.
Yeah. All right, so we get to the actual one-on-one. So Jesse and Leslie have a conversation. Jesse did an absolute fantastic job. I think of just sort of asking some questions and giving her the space. She talked a lot, actually. These are some lengthy sort of monologues that she went on, but I thought that they were heartfelt. I thought they were well articulated. And I thought for the most part they were pretty much on point. Anything about the Jesse portion of it?
No, I mean, I think one thing that she said that was meaningful was, and I quote, "In my head, I had this whole life plan for us. I was 100% sure it was me. He shot me so far up that the fall was so much worse." And I think that's what we were worried about, or I expressed a lot of worry about.
The overpromising
and how crushing it would be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I thought that was probably the most noteworthy. The last part there was the most noteworthy piece of the entirety of her time on the stage with Gerry and with Jesse. And you see how she got there. And I think she's 100% accurate in that reflection of what things happened. And I think she's 100% justified in feeling the way she felt about it.
Yeah, I agree.
So then they bring Gerry out. They have another embrace where they're basically both sobbing. It's been months, since they've seen each other, 4 or 5 months, whatever it's been. And you can tell that there's still a lot of raw emotion there. They sit down, and here's the thing for me. Gerry had months. We talked about in the past, you thought it was really weird why he was getting out there so early. And we're like, this is going to be an apology tour. This is a damage control tour. And I think we saw what that damage control tour was. Well, part of that damage control should have been preparing for what he was going to say in this exact moment. Probably the single most important moment of his entire damage control tour. And I thought he flopped entirely. I thought it was awful. He had no good answers, no good responses, sort of doubled down on his earlier positions. It was crazy to me.
I mean, yeah, apologizing and saying I shouldn't have done that would have gone a really long way here. Accountability and just acknowledgement of what you did wrong. And we didn't get any of that. And I thought it was such an unbelievable miss for him. And in some ways, like, everyone else isn't paying attention to the apology tour. Everyone's watching this show, and this is what's going to stick in their mind, not the
interview you did with Jared or the interview you did on the morning show and all that other stuff. Like that's not the stuff that people are going to remember. These are the moments they're going to remember. And this was pretty bad. This was D plus kind of territory. Yeah. I am also not super complimentary of Leslie here because she just let him off the hook. I think she was really trying to take the high road here and didn't want it to get ugly and just wanted to like, have the moment. But I felt like she could have forced him to be a little bit more accountable and forced him to acknowledge a little bit more. But instead, she just was like, I just want the best for you. And I'm just going to move on. And that's life.
I don't think she could have. Listen, like I, again, have been watching this franchise for a bit. Gerry is still
a beloved lead.
Okay. If we go back to, and I know you didn't watch, but probably our audience did, Pilot Pete's season, when he completely flubbed the ending and ended up proposing to Hannah Ann, and then they ended, and she went in hard because there was no love remaining for Peter at that point in terms of the way that America perceived him. He completely fumbled in his ending, and so we all wanted her to crucify him because of how he got himself into the mess that he did. And she did a damn good job. And just like let him just sit there and look remorseful, basically.
Yeah.
We did not have that opportunity with Gerry. I could have seen if she did go in that hard, Leslie would have come off looking like a scorned woman.
I don't even necessarily mean, I mean, there's a middle road there she could have potentially taken, something a little less of like, I just want the best for you and all's forgiven and let's just move on. Now, in fair, she said, I accept, or
I don't know if I accept your apology, but I understand it.
Yeah.
I don't know. She threw some digs at his integrity.
Sure. Yeah. But they were very subtle. I would have liked it a little bit more. And maybe that's just me. But
no, I would too. And I think so we were very you specifically were very like high on Gerry as it relates to, or protective of Gerry as it relates to the Hollywood Reporter article.
Sure.
Here I feel frustrated that we still have him on this pedestal. And I understand why, because he's like our first Golden Bachelor. And so we need to protect the brand and protect the image. He has been asked so many questions about the Hollywood Reporter article and the finale and all of that stuff. And he's like, dodged and weaved through it and kind of like stuck to his talking points. But like, there's a part of me that like, yeah, I want to see him like actually get some heat, take some heat and take accountability.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think we're going to see that though.
No, I don't either. All right. So anything else we want to talk about with the Leslie Gerry on the couch?
No.
All right. So then we roll on to the altar thing. I'll be honest, boring. Didn't care. We knew who the winner was. Right. Could have just skipped that entirely. I know we can't, but like, is there anything you want to talk about there?
No, I just want to say, like, as a viewer, like there is such the excitement of having like the final two roll up to the platform there and like not really be sure who's going to get out of the limo first, because who gets out of the limo first is the loser, and you're just like crushed. So like from a viewing standpoint, we didn't have like the excitement or adrenaline around that. However, the human part of me is like, I hate when that they already know the answer and they have the person go through all of that effort just to be like, again, publicly broken up with.
Yeah.
So but anyway, so if we go the more human caring route, it means that like the actual proposal is a little bit more lackluster or less interesting or intriguing. But no, I mean, Theresa looked beautiful. The way that Gerry delivered his line about like essentially like, I just can't live with you, something, whatever he said, and then had like the longest pause
in the history of this franchise. Yeah,
and you could see she was like,
she handled that so well. She's like, okay, yep, not gonna freak out, not gonna flip out. Okay, you just embarrassed me on national television. It's cool. I'm just gonna go home now.
I had a lot of respect for her in that moment.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, listen, they're engaged. They exchanged vows. They, you know what also makes them good for one another, that they both said their lines. They said the "Don't stop believing."
Oh
They
yeah,
said the
nice callbacks.
"You're the one I can't live without," like all of that stuff. So like they're on the same page there.
Yeah.
But what we do hear Gerry say, which I think is really important in terms of what went into him choosing Theresa, is that he said Theresa knew how to nurture a long-term relationship. And ultimately, that was what was really appealing about her. And so that brings us all the way back to like what we were talking about with Theresa in one of the many reasons that that they were a good match, or he felt like she was the woman he could not live without, was this piece of knowing through her previous marriage that she knows how to be a partner, that she knows what it means to be husband and wife, or a wife to a husband and a husband to a wife, and things like that.
Yeah. I do want to say that when I'm selected to be the Golden Bachelor in 30 years, I'm going to make the altar ceremony is going to be fantastic. I'm actually going to play Duck Duck Goose with the final two, and that's how I'm going to select which one.
You think I'm gonna die?
That is good. Oh, you could divorce me. I don't know. Anything could happen. Yeah.
It's grim.
Well, what do you think that I'll be like Duck Duck Goose? Like if you're going to tell me that wouldn't get ratings. Imagine that one.
Well, then you wouldn't be 1,000% in on your whoever gets picked.
Well, no, because Duck Duck Goose is not it's not like Eeny Meeny Miny Mo.
Oh yeah, it's not random.
It's not random. You choose who the goose runs. Duck Goose. The goose runs. Is that how they play?
Try to catch you.
Somebody who has kids, can you put in the comments how does Duck Duck Goose play? I know you tap people on the thing and eventually you say something, you all run around. Yeah, and they got to catch you. Yeah.
So we're joined then by the newly engaged couple, Theresa and Gerry. And Theresa does a lot of the talking here. And we learned that for the last several months, they have, of course, remained apart in order to not reveal their relationship, have any spoilers. But they've been talking on the phone every night and getting to know each other even more. And yeah, we hear their big announcement that they are going to, not waste any time and get married in, less than a month.
But yeah, what I'll say is they look good together. Their energy was good. They looked happy. I wish them the best. I do think when you piece it all together, it makes sense why he picked her. I think we learned a lot, and not for nothing, I do think like the Hollywood Reporter article, while it didn't add new information, it did, I think, provide additional support for some opinions we already had. And I think that when you factor that in there, it provides a little more context, and you understand like how he ended up on Theresa.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the reality is what we've learned. One thing that we've learned about Gerry, and again, we've been critical of Gerry, and you've been critical of us for being critical of Gerry. But Gerry is clearly wanting to be adored, right? Yeah. In his things that he said that he loves about some of these women are the way they look at me, the way they make me feel, that it's very much about getting that reflected back to him. And Theresa is the ultimate person. Like, it feels like she has heart eyes when she looks at Gerry. And so in addition to all of this other stuff around shared experiences and both having the experience of being in long-term relationships, I think Theresa is going to love Gerry in the way that he wants and needs to receive love.
Nobody has put Gerry on a bigger pedestal than Theresa.
Correct.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. All right. Anything else we got to cover before we get out of here?
No, I think
Rose and Thorn?
We did it. Yeah.
All right. Where do you want to start? Your rose?
Sure.
All right.
Okay. My rose is something that we already touched on, but my favorite part about this episode was honestly watching the audience watch the show. And I don't know if just this particular audience, it's like
extra emotive.
It was extra emotive. I mean, this was a loaded finale, but they held nothing back in their facial expressions, and I thank you for that, because that was my favorite part. They gave us so much, especially the all of the Golden Bachelorettes there. So I loved that. So that gets my rose, and the production team that was able to capture a lot of that on camera.
Yeah. My rose was, and we didn't really touch on it too much on the episode, but Gerry did actually learn a little bit here. And that's the rose is, in that final scene, that the last chance date with Leslie, you finally saw Gerry, like the light bulb come on for him, like
showed
some restraint finally. And that's what we've been begging of him for 9 episodes now. And so that's my rose, is that I'm hoping that was not a fleeting light bulb, you know, a little flicker. Because I think that will serve him well. And I think it was a good moment for him. It was a terrible scene for him, but hopefully that was a good moment for him where he realizes, like, okay, you know, and I'm all for personal growth. Lord knows I got plenty to do myself, and I like seeing it in other people as well.
Sure. I think that's nice.
Yeah. Thorn?
Gosh, I don't know. I feel like I've already hit on so many things that I found to be very frustrating or upsetting. But I think for me, it was Gerry falling down when, as you pointed out, he had so long to prepare for that exchange, like this live exchange with Leslie. That was really disappointing. And so I think that gets my thorn this week, is like the lack of thoughtful, empathic preparation that he did for that encounter.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my thorn until another event, off-screen event, took my thorn for the week.
Okay.
This one's going to get me perhaps disinvited to Christmas, but my thorn this week goes to your mother. So,
Mom, sorry.
Pam. She called us while we were driving, we were running errands or something like that. And man, oh man, did she go in hard at Leslie.
Not a Leslie fan.
Not a Leslie fan. Oh my God. Vicious. And it was funny. There were so many times your parents have called us over the last, 10 weeks. And I just, every time they call, we just have to hit record on something, because it's hilarious every time they talk about this show. And it was just another one of those moments where I fundamentally disagree with some of her feelings on Leslie. Leslie's a wonderful woman who's doing her best, like the rest of us.
But she had a really human. My mom's criticism was around
showed her true colors. I think it was.
And just Leslie's reaction being a little over the top and perhaps performative. And so I was trying to reason with her and say, like, I would have reacted the same way if I were in her shoes, and like she's having an emotional reaction to having essentially the rug pulled out from under her. But my mom has a little less it's extending a little less grace to Leslie in that. So that was, your daughter becomes a therapist for
a reason. Yeah. No, it was great. We love your mom. She's fantastic.
I appreciated the commentary the entire season.
But I just fundamentally disagree with her opinion on Leslie. That's all. So that's my thorn for the week. So
well, and maybe that's not to try to tie a bow around this whole thing, but I think my plea for us all as an audience, or just as humans in general, is that, like, we are so manipulated into feeling like we need to take a side, as though there is one right and one wrong. And we don't need to do that. And especially as it relates to relationship dynamics, there is very rarely one person that is all right and one person that is all wrong. And a lot of what we do in couples or family therapy is try to determine each individual's contribution to the dynamic. And so I guess I want to bring that up to say that it's not so black or white as we look at the world, as we look at this show, as we do create judgments and reactions and form our own reactions and opinions about what's going on. And so what I'm asking for, and what I'm trying to strive for myself, is to allow us all to have a little bit more nuanced view of what we're seeing in life, in everyday life, and especially on TV.
Yeah, and this touches on one of my personal philosophies, and that is, in almost all situations, all interactions, all decisions that we make as people, there are very few times where any of us make the right decision. Everything we do as human beings is wrong. The question isn't, is it right or wrong? It's, how wrong was it? And that's really what you should be grading most of your actions on. Not was it right or wrong, but how wrong was it? Was it more wrong than the mistake I made yesterday? Was it more wrong than the person I was engaged in, or was it less wrong? And strive to be less wrong as much as possible, not to be right. because when you when you try to view things in terms of black or white,
Right.
there's no gradation or ability to accept that even though you might have been less wrong, you might have been more in the right.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you did something perfectly, and
Yeah.
there's always room for improvement as human beings.
Oh, for sure. And that reminds me of like I'm a social worker by training, and our number one ethical principle isn't to do no harm, it's to do the least amount of harm. And the idea that we need to mitigate against the likely possibility that mistakes can happen.
Yeah.
So,
All right, let's get out of here.
all right, we will be back with Bachelor in Paradise finale, which again, Chris hasn't seen yet, but whoa.
Watching it tonight.
So we'll be back with that, and we'll be back between then and the Golden Wedding, and also before Joey's season with more content. As I said before, drop it in the comments, things that you would like us to talk about, ideas that you have, whether it's related to this particular season, the franchise in general. Even if there are other shows that you're watching that you want to hear our reactions to, let us know. Thank you so much for following along with us here. You can also check out all of our other recap videos on our YouTube channel, so go check that out. We also have another podcast. It's called Wishing You Well. Me and my co-host, Catherine, who's also a therapist, help you navigate your wellness journey each and every week. We have a great episode out with Dr. Sarah Silverman, all on sleep and sleep disorders. It was probably my favorite episode of all time. So definitely check that out. You can also follow along with us on social media at Revive CFW. You can follow me at Amy Albero LCSW, and check out our website, revivecfw.com. All right, we will see you next time. Bye.
See ya.